Welcome to the Cornell Cooperative Extension Dairy Herd Health Troubleshooting Podcast, a podcast series focused on how to go about looking into health issues on a dairy. Each episode will discuss a different area on the dairy where herd health can be impacted. This series has less to do with providing answers to problems. We'll be talking about how to be more successful in your investigations.
Welcome to part 2 of our discussion on troubleshooting mastitis on your dairy. I'm Kathy Barrett with Cornell's PRODAIRY program, and joining this discussion is Dr. Rob Lynch, who's a veterinarian and the herd health and dairy management specialist with Cornell's PRODAIRY program, and Dr. Matthias Wieland, who is also a veterinarian and is with the Quality Milk Production Services, which is part of Cornell's College of Veterinary Medicine. If you haven't listened to the first part of our discussion, I encourage you to do so. In that episode, Rob and Matthias talked about the process that Quality Milk Production Services goes through when they're working with the dairy. They talked about milk sampling, the cow records that they look at, how they analyze milking equipment. So in this episode, we're going to jump right in with Rob asking Matthias about milking routines.
We know how important it is that the milking routine lines up well with the equipment function. All kinds of milking routines out there, and so it's not like there's one recommended routine, but there's some basic pieces to the routine that you want to make sure are satisfied. Want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Actually, milking routine and pre-milking other preparations. So, in other words, what we do to the cow before we attach the milking unit is one of my passions. We just completed that study, Rob, where you participated with, right? And that showed how important pre-milking udder preparation and proper pre-milking stimulation is when it comes to unit on time, but also teat tissue condition. So what we do when we go out on the farms is we start actually with the milking routine at the pen. So cow movement and cow traffic is an essential part of the milking routine, because there you can lose a lot if, for instance, cows are not moved in the same way every single milking. So the night guy is pushing the cows in the other direction, and the morning guy or the day folks are pushing the cows the other way around. And cows don't like that. They get confused and pick up more dirt. They're stressed, they're more hectic, and that already increases the mastitis risk. Then in the parlor, there are a couple of components that we cover during our visits. And that includes the very first step of pre-milking udder preparation, the dip coverage. So there we want to make sure that the milking technicians are doing a good job covering all 4 teats. But not only that, but also make sure that farm management provides them with the proper tools to do so. So once in a while, for instance, teat dip coverage looks pretty poor, but then when you try to do it yourself, you recognize that, for instance, the foamer is not working properly, and the milking technicians are getting tired very quickly of holding that dip cup too long to the teat. The other part that we also evaluate is the timing of the pre-milking stimulation. So we know that we need a certain duration of tactile stimulus to make the cow eject the milk into the cisternal system. So cows do not let down the milk without any tactile stimulus. And then also to make sure that we're waiting long enough after that tactile stimulus before we attach the unit. If we fail to do so, we are milking cows for a longer duration at a lower milk flow. And we know there's an inverse relationship between the two. So a longer milking unit on time at a lower flow results in more teat tissue damage, which impacts, again, the defense mechanism of the teat and therefore increases the mastitis risk. One always ongoing opportunity on a farm is the teat and cleanliness. So we want to make sure that before the milking unit is attached to the teats, that the teats are clean. It is kind of self-explaining that a dirty teat or attaching the units to a dirty teat increases mastitis risk, because there will always be vacuum fluctuation. Imagine a cow is kicking off the unit, cows are being over milked. So there are incidences even in a well fine-tuned parlor that can cause a so-called retrograde pressure gradient, which then can lead to an infection of the mammary gland or the respective quarter. So one fundamental step to prevent that or decrease the risk is teat and cleanliness. So we want to make sure that vast majority, 90% of the teats, are clean at the time the unit comes on the teats. The other part when it comes to pre-milking udder preparation is also we want to make sure that the tools that the milking technicians are provided with are of best quality. And in order to be able to make or clean teats properly, you have to have the right tools, and the towels is a crucial part of that. So we evaluate the towel cleanliness and can also perform a culture of the towels and see how high the bacterial load of these towels is and make recommendations. What we actually do there is, imagine a farm is doing on-farm washing and then puts the towels in the dryer, then brings them out to the farm. What we do is we take a towel after each of these steps, and then if one of these is high, we are able to identify where that variability or that increased count is coming from and immediately be able to tell the farmer where the opportunity area can be.
Yeah, I mean, and the technicians have a lot of work to do in the parlor, and sometimes they can only do so much. So the cleanliness of the cows coming into the parlor will really have an effect on their ability to milk clean teats. I want to talk a little bit about investigating that part of it, or what's coming into the parlor.
Yes, I already mentioned the cow traffic, but cow traffic is only covering the alleyways within the pen and on the way through the parlor. What is also very important, the stall maintenance. In there, we have a couple of parameters that we evaluate. The first one being the cow positioning. So we want to make sure that cows that are laying down, if they lose manure, that the manure paddy is falling outside of the curb onto the alleyway and not into the stall, where it then could contaminate the udder and following the teats and then perhaps result in an intramammary infection. So cow positioning is a very important part, and we evaluate that in the lactating pens, but also in the dry cow pens if there is an issue with dry cow management based on our previous analysis. Then the bedding management also goes into that. The cow positioning is not only directly linked to the stall dimensions, but also to the quantity of the bedding. So we discuss and inquire the information about the bedding frequency, the bedding amount that is added to make sure that the cows are not only laying comfortable, but also in the right position so that in any case, the manure paddy is then falling outside of the curb and not contaminating the stalls. The other part that is very crucial, and I already mentioned that, is the alleyways. What we see on a very frequent basis on farms where the alleyways are cleaned with scrapers is that the scrapers, for instance, are not functioning properly. Most frequently, we see that they collapse on the way back, but then do not open all the way up, either at the very beginning of the alleyway or sometimes even throughout the entire length of the alleyway. So this is something that we also evaluate in order to identify opportunity areas to decrease the mastitis risk in the facilities, in the individual pens, and on the facility as a whole.
So I'm sure you've seen a lot out there. Maybe you've got a couple examples of things you've troubleshooted for some farms here in New York.
Yes, yeah, sure. One case actually that I have been dealing with over the last month was a farm that was specifically dealing with Klebsiella cases or clinical cases caused by Klebsiella species. And there we were contacted by the farm management because they were experiencing an increase of clinical mastitis cases, but also an increase in bulk tank somatic cell count. So there, our first step was to look into the culture data. We were fortunate the farm has been sending in milk samples to our lab on a very regular basis. So it was a very quick analysis, and we could see that the vast majority of clinical cases was caused by Klebsiella, and that these cases were happening across all cows all groups, so all parodies, and all stages of lactation. So that was the first step. And then after contacting the herd veterinarian, the nutritionist, talking to farm management, we scheduled a herd visit and did just that evaluation on that farm. And maybe I have to explain the Klebsiella or the dynamics of herd outbreak, clinical mastitis outbreak with Klebsiella species a little bit better by explaining how Klebsiella can behave. So Klebsiella usually is considered as an environmental pathogen, so it's a coliform pathogen, just like Escherichia coli. And for the longest time, it has been considered as a so-called environmental pathogen. So that means that Klebsiella can be found basically everywhere. So it is shed in the feces, it can be found in the feces, and then can be found around the water troughs, in the alleyways, can be found in the soil. So it is basically everywhere. Over the last years, with progression in the diagnostics, we understand too the dynamics of Klebsiella infection a little bit better, and found that Klebsiella can actually also behave like a contagious pathogen. So just like Staph aureus or Mycoplasma, which we believe that is predominantly spreading between cows, mostly in the milking parlor by contaminated milking equipment. So this is the very interesting thing on our side, but also the frustrating part for the farmer, that Klebsiella can behave as both an environmental pathogen, but also acquire the ability to spread between cows and behave just like a contagious pathogen. One additional step that I didn't talk about previously on that specific farm was that we wanted to know, well, what specific strain or strains of Klebsiella, what type of Klebsiella are we dealing with on that given farm? In order to do that, we did a so-called fingerprinting or PCR analysis, which is basically fingerprinting of the Klebsiella strains from 12 cows. Gloria Gioia and Paola Moroni from our molecular lab can perform that analysis here in Ithaca. And there we found that 3 strains were found in more than one cow, which indicated that on this given farm, we're dealing with a couple of Klebsiella strains that behave like a contagious pathogen. On the other hand, it also showed that it's not only a contagious behavior of that Klebsiella strain, right? There were several strains that indicated some that were only found in one cow. So that indicated that in addition to the contagious behavior, there is also an environmental component. So with that in mind, we had to really focus on everything again. As I mentioned previously, the targeted approach is okay, but let's not forget about the big picture and make sure that we cover it all on our visit. So what we found on that farm actually is some opportunity with the cow positioning, and then some opportunity with the bedding frequency. The farm was bedding only twice a week, which then led to poor cow positioning. Too many manure patties were found in the stall, so stall cleanliness was poor. And again, when we think about the environmental components, the fact that Klebsiella is shed in the feces, that was a huge mastitis risk factor for Klebsiella mastitis. Then when we think about the facility again, we found that the vast majority of the scrapers didn't work properly, such that they collapsed on the way back, but did not open all the way up. So they were leaving a lot of manure on the alleys, even though they were running 24 hours a day. That was addressed. And then in addition to that, we also found that the milking technicians or the pusher were not cleaning the cross alleys on a regular basis. So we found a couple of opportunity areas there: alley scrapers, stall cow positioning and stall cleanliness, and then the management of the cross alleys in addition to that. And that certainly increased the risk of Klebsiella cases on that farm. That was, in my opinion, the environmental part. That was one piece of the puzzle on that farm, actually. And it took some MacGyvering, some engineering to figure out how to make these alley scrapers work best, it took some additional training for the milking technicians and the pushers to make sure that the cross alleys are clean. And then it took some fine-tuning on the neck rail in the pens that were most affected by the poor cow positioning. And then obviously some changes in the bedding management. The farm increased the bedding frequency on that given farm to 7 days per week bedding management. And the other component, that was the environmental part, as I said, and the other component of that strategy that we have been working on was to improve the protocol in the milking routine and in the milking parlor. So at the very beginning, as long as the alleyways were dirty, the cows were coming in very, very dirty with poor lower leg hygiene and a poor udder hygiene, which we evaluated on that given day. And so what we implemented on that farm, because that led to dirty clusters, which in our opinion, you can do the best job ever in terms of teat and cleanliness. But if the clusters are dirty that you then attach to the cow, your work has been in vain. So what we implemented on that farm is a regular cleaning of the milking clusters such that all units were sprayed and dried after each pen was milked. And units, when I talk about spraying the units, that was all only performed when the parlor was completely empty. So cows need to be out of the parlor when we use the water hose to spray down the milking parlor or the milking equipment. So that was another very essential part on that farm. To address the contagious component of the Klebsiella on that farm management then decided to segregate all cows that are isolated or identified with a Klebsiella infection, put them in a separate pen that was milked last, and implement a manual backflush system. So after each site, the milking units were flushed with a disinfectant, with water that was enriched with disinfectant, to ensure that we are not spreading the infection from one quarter from cow A to the second quarter of cow B that already has an infection on one of the other quarters. And with those strategies, we could significantly improve milk quality and udder health and decrease the incidence of clinical mastitis on that farm.
That's great. Interesting case. Klebsiella is a pretty nasty bug once they get that infection. Matthias, thanks again for going through all these steps. It sounds a bit overwhelming, but there's a definite logic there that makes sure all the bases are covered.
Well, thank you very much for having me for that podcast. I'm glad I could share some of our work that we do on a regular basis, quality milk. If you folks out there have any questions regarding udder health, don't hesitate to contact us. Depending on where you are located in New York State, choose the one that is closest to you, but certainly we will refer you in the right direction if you're ending up on the wrong location. So don't hesitate contacting us. We're more than happy to chat with you and come out to your farm and work together on some plans to improve milk quality in New York State.
Thanks for listening to this Herd Health Troubleshooting episode. You can find more episodes like this one on the CCE Dairy Educator channel on SoundCloud or on the PRODAIRY website, along with many other resources.